My husband fixes cars for minimum wage, Lauren said, lifting her champagne glass as if she had just delivered the funniest line of the night. The people around her laughed before they even looked at me. That was the kind of room it was. Sterling Automotive had rented the top floor of a downtown Detroit hotel for the unveiling of its newest electric SUV, and everything in the ballroom seemed designed to remind you that ordinary people did not belong there. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city. White tablecloths reflected the gold light from the chandeliers. Executives in tailored suits stood beneath giant screens showing slow-motion footage of polished vehicles racing along mountain roads. I wore a clean navy work shirt, dark jeans, and the only pair of dress shoes I owned. I had scrubbed my hands twice before leaving Mason Street Garage, but a thin line of grease still sat beneath one thumbnail. Lauren noticed it the moment I arrived. She always noticed things like that now. Ethan works at a little garage on the west side, she continued, smiling at 3 department heads and a regional vice president. He changes oil, replaces brakes, whatever comes through the door. It keeps him busy. Keeps me busy. Not supports a youth apprenticeship program. Not keeps single mothers from losing their jobs when an old transmission fails. Not solves problems certified dealerships give up on. Just keeps him busy. I did not correct her. I took a slow drink of club soda and watched the city lights reflect in the glass. My name is Ethan Walker. I was 43 years old, and until that evening, my wife believed the grease on my hands was proof that I had failed. Brandon Pierce leaned against the cocktail table beside her. He was Sterling's vice president of brand strategy, the kind of man who wore a watch that cost more than most used cars and made sure everyone noticed it. Minimum wage? He asked, grinning at Lauren. In this economy? Lauren, that is practically charity work. Another wave of laughter moved around the table. Lauren gave him a playful tap on the arm. Be nice. But she was laughing too. That was the part that stayed with me. Not Brandon's voice. Not the way 2 younger managers looked me over and then looked away. Her laugh. I had heard it in our first apartment when the heater broke during a Michigan winter and we slept in coats under 3 blankets. I had heard it in the passenger seat of my old Ford when the radio stopped working and I sang every song badly just to keep her smiling. Back then, my work boots did not embarrass her. Back then, she used to tell people I could fix anything. Somewhere along the way, anything had become nothing. Brandon reached into his jacket and pulled out a set of keys with a silver Sterling emblem. He tossed them toward me without warning. I caught them against my chest. Since we have a professional here, he said, loud enough for the people at the next table to hear. My car has been making a clicking sound. Maybe you can take a look before dessert. A few people laughed harder than the joke deserved. I turned the keys over in my palm. They belonged to a black Sterling Vantage, a model with a starting price close to $90,000. I knew the engine platform. I knew the suspension geometry. I knew the supplier that manufactured the electronic braking module. I also knew Brandon's clicking sound was probably a loose heat shield, a 15-minute repair if he had bothered to ask like a normal person. What do you say, Ethan? Lauren asked. Her smile looked polished and careful, the same smile she used in company photos. You are always saying you like to help people. I looked at her for a moment. She did not seem cruel. That almost made it worse. Cruelty would have required intention. Lauren simply believed this was the role I had agreed to play. The harmless husband. The man in the background. The one who should be grateful to stand near successful people. I placed Brandon's keys on the table between us. The metal made a small, clean sound against the glass. Keep them, I said. Brandon raised an eyebrow. Too complicated for you? No, I replied. You may need something to drive home in. The laughter faded, not because they understood, but because my tone did not match the joke. Lauren's smile tightened. Ethan, I heard the warning in my name. Behave. Do not make this awkward. Remember where you are? Across the ballroom, near the stage, Sterling's chief executive officer had just entered carrying a narrow black box in both hands. Charles Bennett was 62, silver-haired, and usually impossible to distract once an event began. Yet the moment he saw me standing beside Lauren, his steps stopped. His eyes moved from my face to Brandon's keys on the table, then back to me. The color left his expression. He started walking toward us, and for the first time that evening, nobody around Lauren was laughing. Charles Bennett was less than 20 feet away when a man in a charcoal suit stepped between us. Daniel Reed did not touch him. He did not need to. He leaned close, spoke 3 quiet words. and Charles stopped as if the floor had shifted beneath his shoes. 12 minutes remaining. I knew what Daniel meant. At exactly 4 o'clock, the final regulatory approval would become binding. The funds would clear, and Sterling Automotive would no longer belong to the people currently smiling beneath its logo. Until then, Charles could not say my name from that stage. He could not shake my hand in front of Lauren. He could not open the black box. One careless sentence could delay a deal that had taken 6 months, 3 law firms, and more sleepless nights than I wanted to count. Charles glanced at the clock above the ballroom doors, then back at me. His fingers tightened around the box. Brandon followed his gaze and gave a small laugh. Looks like the boss wants his car checked too. Nobody answered. Daniel turned slightly, and our eyes met across the room. His expression remained neutral, but I saw the warning in it. Stay quiet. Let the clock finish the work. I had spent years learning how to do exactly that. Machines tell you what is wrong if you stop forcing them to speak. A faint vibration, a change in temperature, a rhythm that falls half a beat out of place. People are not much different. Lauren adjusted the silver bracelet on her wrist, something she did whenever a conversation stopped moving in the direction she wanted. Charles, she called, her voice brightening. Have you met my husband, Ethan? The question almost made me smile. Charles had known me longer than she had known anyone in that room. He knew which diner served coffee strong enough for meetings before sunrise. He knew why I never signed a document without reading every line twice. He knew what Sterling had taken from me 8 years earlier, and what I was about to take responsibility for now. But Charles understood the rules. He approached at a measured pace and extended his hand. Mr. Walker, he said. The title landed strangely among people who had been calling me a mechanic as if it were an insult. I shook his hand. Mr. Bennett. His grip was firm, but his eyes carried an apology he could not explain yet. Brandon looked between us. You two know each other? Ethan has provided valuable insight on several technical matters, Charles said carefully. Lauren blinked. Technical matters? Nothing formal, I said. Daniel gave the smallest nod. Charles looked at the black box and then at the clock again. 11 minutes. Lauren stepped closer to me, lowering her voice. Why did he call you Mr. Walker? That is my name. You know what I mean. I did. She wanted a version of the truth small enough to fit inside the life she had assigned me. I could have told her everything right then. I could have explained the patent filings, the emergency board meetings, the financing agreement, and the reason Charles had visited Mason Street Garage after midnight 3 weeks earlier. I could have told her that the company badge hanging from her neck would soon open doors only because I allowed it to. But truth delivered too early can sound like desperation. I had no interest in begging my wife to believe me. Brandon reached for his keys again. No hard feelings, Ethan. We were only having fun. I slid them across the glass toward him. I understood the joke. He picked them up, but his grin had lost some of its shape. Good. For a second, I thought you were offended. Being underestimated is not offensive, I said. Sometimes it is useful. The regional vice president beside him stopped smiling. Lauren studied my face as if she had discovered a warning light on a dashboard and could not decide whether to ignore it. Across the room, a member of the event staff approached Charles and whispered that the presentation was ready. Charles nodded, but before turning away, he placed one hand over the black box. We will speak shortly, he told me. Lauren heard him. So did Brandon. This time, nobody laughed. Charles walked toward the stage while Daniel remained near the ballroom doors, checking his phone. 10 minutes. A promotional film began across the giant screens, filling the room with images of chrome, open highways, and families smiling inside vehicles they trusted. I watched those images and thought about the 3 cars sitting inside Mason Street Garage, each one carrying the same hidden defect. Lauren touched my arm. Her hand felt cautious now. Ethan, what is going on? Before I could answer, Daniel looked up from his phone and gave me a single, deliberate nod. The final signature had arrived early. 6 weeks earlier, the first warning arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning in the form of a silver Sterling crossover that should not have been in my garage. Mason Street Garage sat between a tire shop and a boarded-up bakery on the west side of Detroit, 3 service bays under a faded blue sign my father had painted by hand. We were not fancy. The waiting room had 4 mismatched chairs, a coffee machine that complained louder than most engines, and a space heater that worked only when it felt respected. But people trusted us. That mattered more than polished floors. I arrived before 6 every morning, unlocked the side door, turned on the fluorescent lights, and listened as the building woke around me. Metal settled. Pipes clicked. Rain tapped the roof. That morning, a woman named Denise Parker was already waiting in the parking lot with her hazard lights blinking. She was a nurse at Henry Ford Hospital, divorced, raising 2 boys, and driving a vehicle she still owed 4 years of payments on. She looked exhausted when she handed me the keys. "The brake pedal went soft twice on the freeway," she said. "The dealership told me they could not find anything." Her voice carried the kind of fear people try to hide when they cannot afford a new problem. I told her we would check it before she went home from her shift. She asked what it would cost. I told her nothing until I knew what was wrong. That was how we worked. Mason Street Garage paid me less than I could have made somewhere else because most of what came in went toward keeping the apprenticeship program alive. 3 teenagers worked with me after school. 2 had been told college was not for them. 1 had been told he would never hold a steady job. I knew what labels could do when people repeated them long enough. I also knew they were usually wrong. By 7:30, the Sterling was on the lift. Marcus, my oldest apprentice, stood beside me with a flashlight while I checked the lines, calipers, fluid level, and master cylinder. Everything looked clean. Too clean. The dealership had done the obvious work. The problem was not mechanical in the traditional sense. It was hiding in the conversation between the vehicle and its own computers. I connected a diagnostic scanner and watched the data scroll across the screen. Wheel speed, pedal pressure, battery voltage, hydraulic command. For several minutes, every number behaved. Then one signal dropped for less than half a second. Most technicians would have missed it. The system recovered so quickly that the computer did not store a permanent fault code. But I had seen that pattern before. 8 years earlier, I had watched the same signal disappear on a test bench inside a Sterling supplier facility. I leaned closer to the monitor. "Run it again," I told Marcus. He pressed the pedal while I recorded the output. The signal failed a second time. Same interval. Same recovery. My hands went cold. Not from fear. Recognition. There is a particular feeling when the past returns wearing a newer body. The paint changes. The dashboard improves. The company writes a different name on the brochure. But underneath, the old mistake is still there, waiting for speed, heat, and bad timing. I lowered the crossover and opened the electronic control housing. The module carried a supplier code etched near the connector. I wiped the dust away with my thumb. A 17-character identification number appeared beneath it. The room seemed to narrow around that line of metal. Walker Precision Systems had tested the original version of that component 8 years earlier. I had rejected it. The recovery delay was too slow under specific voltage conditions, especially after repeated braking in cold weather. Sterling had wanted production to begin before the winter sales cycle. I had refused to sign the approval. 2 months later, my contract disappeared. 6 months after that, most of my company did too. Marcus noticed my expression. "You know that part?" he asked. "I know what it can do," I said. I checked Sterling's service database. No recall. No technical bulletin. No public warning. Only a recommendation to update software if customers reported intermittent braking concerns. I read the language twice. Intermittent concern. Corporate words have a way of making danger sound inconvenient. Before noon, a second Sterling arrived. This one a dark blue sedan owned by a retired mail carrier. Same complaint. Different dealership. Same module code. By late afternoon, a third vehicle sat outside our bay doors. 3 cars. 3 drivers. 1 hidden failure. Rain streaked the garage windows while I spread the diagnostic reports across my workbench. Lauren called at 5:40 to remind me about a dinner with her department. I told her I might be late. "Another old transmission?" she asked. "Something like that," I said. After we hung up, I stared at the supplier number until the digits blurred beneath the fluorescent light. Then I opened an encrypted email account I had not used in years and attached every test result. The message contained only one sentence. "Charles, the problem we warned them about is back." Charles did not answer that night. By the time I locked Mason Street Garage, the rain had turned the streets black and silver beneath the traffic lights. I drove home with the diagnostic reports on the passenger seat and the supplier code repeating in my head like a warning chime. Lauren was standing in our bedroom when I arrived, surrounded by 3 dresses laid across the bed. A garment bag from an expensive boutique hung from the closet door. She held up a dark green dress and studied herself in the mirror without turning toward me. "You are late," she said. I told you there was a problem at the garage. There is always a problem at the garage. Her voice was calm, but the words had edges. She chose the green dress and placed the others aside. The dinner was not a celebration, at least not officially. Brandon had invited several senior executives to discuss the launch campaign, and Lauren believed the evening could decide whether she became Sterling's next communications director. She had spent 12 years building her career. I respected that. I had watched her take calls during vacations, rewrite presentations after midnight, and walk into rooms where people underestimated her. I knew what ambition cost. What I did not understand was why she had started charging that cost to our marriage. She looked down at my navy work shirt. A faint stain marked the cuff where I had reached into Denise Parker's control housing. You are not wearing that tonight. I brought a jacket. A jacket does not make it formal. She opened my side of the closet and pulled out a white dress shirt I had not worn since her cousin's wedding. Please wear this. And scrub your hands again. I looked at my fingers. The grease had settled into the lines around my nails, the kind that needed more than soap to remove. Once, Lauren had called those hands honest. Now she treated them like something that might embarrass her under restaurant lighting. I changed without arguing. We drove downtown in her company-leased sedan while she practiced names and job titles under her breath. At a red light, I told her about the 3 vehicles. I kept my explanation simple. Same braking complaint. Same control module. Same failure pattern. Lauren stared through the windshield. Did the dealership confirm it? The dealerships missed it. Then how do you know it is real? Because I tested it. She released a slow breath. Ethan, I need tonight to go well. This is not about tonight. Everything is about tonight right now. Brandon has been pushing for me to lead the national campaign. I cannot walk into dinner accusing the company of selling unsafe vehicles because my husband saw a strange number on a scanner. The light turned green. She accelerated before the car behind us could signal impatience. I watched the buildings pass outside my window. It was not a strange number. You know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean. Silence filled the car. It was not the comfortable silence we once shared during long drives. This silence measured distance. At the restaurant, Brandon greeted Lauren before he acknowledged me. He wore a gray suit and a smile designed for rooms with investors. When Lauren mentioned that I had found a possible technical issue, he laughed softly and waved for the hostess to bring another bottle of sparkling water. We have more than 400 engineers, he said. I think they can handle it. Engineers only solve problems they are allowed to see, I replied. His smile held, but his eyes changed. And you are seeing something they are not. 3 vehicles with identical failures. Lauren touched my wrist beneath the table. Not affection. A warning. Brandon leaned back. Ethan, you change oil and replace worn brake pads. There is dignity in that. But Sterling operates on a different level. Lauren looked at me, then at the executives around the table. She had a choice in that moment. She could ask one question. She could request one report. She could simply say that my judgment had earned her trust before. Instead, she smiled. He gets focused when something interests him. It is one of his little projects. Little projects. I nodded once and let the conversation move on. I listened as Brandon described the launch schedule, the media strategy, and the importance of protecting consumer confidence. Protecting confidence, not earning it. By dessert, Lauren was laughing again, and Brandon was telling her that the promotion announcement could come within the month. I excused myself, walked to the quiet hallway near the restrooms, and checked my phone. One new message waited from Charles Bennett. It contained 6 words. Do not discuss this with anyone. Beneath that was a second message with an address and a time. Sterling Executive Airfield. Midnight. I returned to the table, finished my coffee, and said nothing. Lauren believed my silence meant I had finally understood my place. She did not know I was counting the minutes until I met the only man at Sterling who already knew exactly who I was. The Sterling Executive Airfield sat behind a chain-link fence 12 miles outside Detroit, a private strip of concrete bordered by dark warehouses and winter bare trees. I arrived at 11:52 and parked beside a hangar with no company logo on the door. Charles was already inside, standing beneath white industrial lights with his coat folded over one arm. Daniel Reed waited beside a conference table covered in sealed folders, engineering reports, and a laptop displaying the same supplier code I had photographed that morning. No one offered coffee. No one made small talk. Charles looked older than he had at dinner events, not weaker, just tired in a way expensive suits could not hide. How certain are you? he asked. Certain enough that Denise Parker is not driving her car home until I replace the module. That is not what I asked. I placed my test results on the table. 3 vehicles. 3 identical signal failures. Same voltage drop. Same recovery delay. Same component family. Sterling was warned about 8 years ago. Daniel opened one of the folders. Inside were internal service complaints from dealerships across Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Most have been classified as customer perception issues or software irregularities. Different words. Same pattern. Charles lowered himself into a chair. The board believes the latest update solved it. The update hides the warning light, I said. It does not change the hardware response. The hangar went quiet except for the low hum of the heating system. Charles looked at the reports, then at me. We should have listened to you the first time. 8 years earlier, Walker Precision Systems had occupied 40,000 square feet in a manufacturing park near Dearborn. I had started the company with 12 employees, 2 borrowed testing rigs, and a contract everyone told me was too large for a small independent supplier. We designed control systems for braking and stability platforms. Our name was not printed on dashboards, but our work lived beneath them. I knew every engineer on the floor. I knew whose daughter was applying to college, whose husband had lost his job, and who needed Friday payroll to clear before the mortgage company called Monday morning. Sterling offered us the largest contract we had ever seen. If we approved their new electronic module before the winter production deadline, Walker Precision would double in size. I wanted that future. I wanted it badly enough to test the component around the clock for 6 straight weeks. The failure appeared only under a narrow set of conditions. Low temperature, repeated braking, a brief voltage fluctuation. The signal vanished for less than 1 second, then returned as if nothing had happened. On a test bench, it looked small. At 70 miles per hour on an icy Michigan highway, small could become the only thing that mattered. I refused to sign the validation report. Brandon Pierce was a program manager then, younger, hungrier, and already skilled at turning pressure into someone else's problem. He came to my office with a revised report and placed a pen beside my hand. This is not a rejection, he said. It is a timing issue. The module fails. Under laboratory conditions most drivers will never experience. Then most drivers will be fortunate. His smile disappeared. Do you understand what happens if you delay this launch? Do you understand what happens if I approve it? I did not sign. 2 weeks later, Sterling transferred the contract to another supplier. A month after that, rumors spread that Walker Precision had missed deadlines and failed compliance reviews. Banks tightened our credit. Clients paused orders. 47 employees watched me stand in the cafeteria and explain that there was not enough work to keep every line open. I sold equipment, emptied my savings, and paid final wages before I paid myself. By spring, the building belonged to someone else. Lauren had stood beside me through those first months. She told me integrity mattered more than a company name. I believe she meant it. Maybe she did then. What Brandon never knew was that I had written the original diagnostic architecture before Sterling changed. Suppliers. The patents remain mine. So did the raw test data, the failure models, and the corrective design they refused to purchase. I lost the factory, but I did not surrender the truth. Daniel turned the laptop toward me. Sterling has received 187 related complaints in 14 months, he said. How many made it to the board? I asked. Charles answered without looking up. 9. That number settled over the table like cold dust. Someone had filtered the reports before they reached him. Someone had decided that protecting the launch mattered more than showing the full pattern. I opened the oldest file and saw Brandon's authorization code at the bottom of the review chain. 8 years had passed, but his method had not changed. Rename the risk. Narrow the audience. Wait for the problem to become someone else's responsibility. Charles folded his hands. Can your original design fix this? Not by itself. The platform has changed. Can you build a solution? I looked through the hangar doors toward the runway, where small blue lights marked a path into darkness. Yes, I said, but I will not hand Sterling another report that disappears before it reaches the people responsible. Charles nodded slowly. Then tell me what you need. I closed the folder with Brandon's name on it. Access to every complaint, every test, and every supplier agreement. No filters. No public relations language. No executive summaries. Daniel began writing. Charles asked the next question carefully. And if the board refuses? I thought about the factory I had lost, the employees I had sent home, and the 3 cars waiting beneath fluorescent lights at Mason Street garage. Then Sterling does not need another consultant, I said. It needs a new owner. By 6 the next morning, I was back beneath the fluorescent lights at Mason Street garage with 3 Sterling vehicles lined up across the bays and a fresh pot of coffee going cold beside my toolbox. The rain had stopped, but the city still looked washed in gray through the front windows. Marcus arrived first, then Jamal and Tyler, our 2 younger apprentices. I told them we were closing the shop to new work for the day. Marcus looked at the vehicles and asked whether the dealership was finally taking the problem seriously. Not yet, I said. That is why we are. I divided the testing into stages. Jamal recorded battery voltage. Tyler monitored wheel speed data. Marcus handled pedal pressure while I connected an external sensor array to the control module. We heated one vehicle, chilled another using portable cooling equipment, and repeated the same braking sequence until the pattern emerged. The signal failed at 43 degrees. It failed again at 38. Under repeated electrical load, the recovery delay stretched from less than half a second to nearly 2 full seconds. On paper, 2 seconds looked small. On a freeway, it could feel like the entire world had stopped listening. By noon, the workbench was buried beneath printed graphs, wiring diagrams, and handwritten notes. I rebuilt the original correction model from memory, then adapted it to Sterling's newer platform. The old design could not simply be installed. The software architecture had changed, and the voltage regulator now communicated through a different network. So I built a bridge between them. Not a permanent answer. A proof. I used a spare processor, a salvaged connector, and a circuit board I had been developing for diagnostic training. The first test failed. The second produced noise in the pressure reading. The third held steady for 11 minutes before the signal dropped again. Marcus watched me erase a page of calculations. How long are we staying? He asked. Until the car tells the truth. He nodded and returned to the lift. That was the difference between a garage and a boardroom. In a boardroom, people could rename failure until it sounded manageable. In a garage, the machine either worked or it did not. At 4:15, a dark red sedan pulled into the lot. Maria Alvarez stepped out wearing a navy Sterling jacket and carrying a cardboard archive box against her chest. I recognized her name from the internal reports Daniel had shown me. She supervised quality control at Sterling's main Michigan assembly plant. Charles had not mentioned sending her. She locked the front door behind herself and placed the box on my workbench. I was told you needed the reports nobody wanted to read, she said. Inside were printed complaint logs, engineering emails, supplier test results, and meeting notes marked confidential. Some dated back more than a year. Maria had kept copies after several files disappeared from Sterling's internal system. She showed me warnings from field engineers in Ohio and Wisconsin. She showed me a recommendation for an immediate production pause that Brandon's department had reduced to a request for further review. She showed me photographs of damaged modules, incomplete software updates, and customer complaints grouped under harmless labels. Why did you keep all of this? I asked. Because every time I raised the issue, someone changed the wording instead of changing the part. Her answer carried no drama. That made it heavier. We worked side by side until sunset. Maria matched the failure pattern to production batches. Marcus helped trace the voltage loss through the updated control network. At 7:30, my prototype completed 100 consecutive test cycles without a signal drop. Nobody cheered. We watched the screen for another 5 minutes, because people who work around machines learn not to celebrate before the final reading. The line stayed steady. I called Charles. He arrived an hour later with Daniel and 2 members of Sterling's board. Their polished shoes looked out of place on the stained concrete floor. I demonstrated the failure first, then installed the prototype and repeated the test. The signal held. Charles stared at the monitor as though it had given him permission to breathe again. Daniel opened a financial report. A full recall without a working replacement could cost Sterling more than $900 million, freeze dealer inventory, and trigger loan provisions the company could not meet. If the defect became public before a correction plan existed, Sterling might not survive the year. One board member asked how quickly my system could be manufactured. 12 weeks for full production, I said. 6 if we use 2 qualified suppliers, and Sterling stops protecting the people who created the delay. The room went still. Charles asked what else I needed. I pointed to Maria's box, then to the prototype resting beneath the work light. I have the evidence. I have the correction. What Sterling does not have is a structure that will let either one reach the public without being buried. Daniel closed the financial report. What are you proposing? I looked around the garage my father had built, at the apprentices who had stayed late without being asked, and at the executives standing beneath lights that made every stain visible. I will license the design and build the recall plan, I said, but only if the board gives me authority over safety, suppliers, and internal reporting. One director frowned. You are asking for operational control. No, I said. I am asking for the power to prevent the truth from disappearing again. Charles studied me for a long moment. And if the board will not agree? I placed the prototype on the table between us. Then I will take the solution to someone who will. The board did not give me an answer that night. They left Mason Street Garage carrying copies of Maria's reports and the uncomfortable knowledge that the man standing beside a stained workbench had just shown them how close their company was to collapse. Charles stayed behind after the others drove away. He stood beneath the faded sign my father had painted and looked at the prototype resting on the table. They will protect their positions before they protect the company, he said. Then we stopped asking them for permission. Daniel arrived the next morning with a plan that looked impossible until he explained it one page at a time. Sterling's stock had been falling for months. Supplier debt was climbing. Several institutional investors were quietly looking for an exit. The company still appeared strong from the outside, but underneath, the structure had started to loosen. Daniel knew a private investment group called Northline Capital that specialized in rebuilding American manufacturing companies. They had money, patience, and one condition. They would not invest unless the person holding the technical solution also held real authority. I brought the patents. Northline brought the financing. Charles brought the support of two board members who still cared more about Sterling's future than their titles. We formed Walker Mobility Trust 3 days later in a conference room above a bank in downtown Detroit. The name felt too large for a man who still opened the garage every morning at 6, but Daniel said that was the point. A trust did not need polished shoes or a corner office. It needed assets, legal structure, and signatures. My patents became part of the transaction. The corrective braking system became the foundation. Northline began purchasing Sterling shares through several approved channels, while Daniel negotiated with lenders holding company debt. Every move had to remain confidential. If Brandon or the wrong board members learned what was happening, they could poison the agreement before it closed. I signed a non-disclosure contract thick enough to stop a door. It prohibited me from telling employees, suppliers, reporters, friends, and family. Family. I read that word twice before putting my name on the final page. Lauren believed I was working longer hours because Mason Street Garage had fallen behind. When I came home after midnight, she saw oil on my sleeves and exhaustion in my face. She did not see the patent attorneys in Washington, the financial calls with New York, or the encrypted board meetings that began after she went to sleep. She saw a mechanic trying to keep an old garage alive. I saw no reason to correct her while the agreement remained uncertain. Part of me also wanted to know whether respect could survive without a revelation. The answer arrived in small moments. She stopped asking when I would be home. She began attending Sterling dinners without inviting me. When colleagues called during breakfast, she moved into another room, lowering her voice as though my presence might weaken her credibility. One Saturday morning, she found a legal folder beside my coffee and asked what it was. Patent work, I said, for the diagnostic system. She glanced at the cover but did not open it. That little garage project? It is becoming more than that. Everything is becoming more than that. With you lately. She kissed my cheek, gathered her laptop, and left for a strategy session with Brandon. The folder contained a preliminary agreement giving Walker Mobility Trust the option to purchase enough voting shares to control Sterling Automotive. She had stood 3 feet from the truth and treated it like clutter. Over the next 4 weeks, the pieces moved quietly. Northline bought shares from 2 pension funds. Daniel negotiated a conversion agreement with a regional bank. Charles secured emergency board authority to evaluate outside restructuring offers. Maria delivered production records proving the defect extended across 3 vehicle platforms. At Mason Street Garage, Marcus helped me refine the prototype until it completed 10,000 simulated braking cycles without a signal loss. Every night, The solution grew stronger while the public story remained clean and confident. Sterling announced record consumer interest in the new launch. Brandon appeared on business television and praised the company's commitment to safety. Lauren wrote the talking points. I watched the interview from the garage break room with the sound low. Brandon smiled into the camera and said there were no systemic concerns across Sterling's current vehicle line. Maria stood beside me holding a report documenting 187 complaints. Does he believe that? She asked. He believes confidence matters more than accuracy. And Lauren? I did not answer. I still hoped she had not seen the full reports. Hope can survive on very little information when the truth costs too much. That evening, Daniel called with the first real victory. Walker Mobility Trust and Northline Capital had secured 38% of Sterling's voting shares and binding options for another 14%. Once the regulatory review cleared, we would control the company. The closing date was set for the afternoon of Sterling's launch event. Until then, nothing could be revealed. I drove home through light snow and found Lauren at the dining table surrounded by draft statements. Her reading glasses sat low on her nose. A Sterling Communications folder lay open beside her. Big project? I asked. She turned one page face down before answering. Brandon wants me to prepare a response in case reporters ask about breaking complaints. My hand tightened around the back of the empty chair. What response? She looked at me with the tired patience people use when they believe a subject is beyond someone else's understanding. That there is no verified safety defect and that isolated concerns are being handled through routine software updates. I looked at the folder, then at my wife. She had finally been shown the warning, and Sterling had asked her to help bury it. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The dining room was warm, but the folder between us made the air feel colder. Lauren kept one hand on the page she had turned face down. I knew that movement. It was not guilt yet. It was instinct. Protect the document. Protect the job. Protect the version of the world that kept her moving upward. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Are the cars safe? I asked. She looked at me as though I had skipped several steps in a conversation she wanted to control. The engineering department is reviewing the complaints. That is not what I asked. Her eyes moved toward the folder, then back to me. I do not know. The answer landed harder because it was honest. For the first time in weeks, she was not repeating Brandon's language. She was telling me the truth. I leaned forward. Then how can you write that there is no verified defect? Because that is the approved position. Approved by whom? Legal, brand strategy, senior leadership, and the engineers? Her jaw tightened. Ethan, I am not an engineer. You do not need to be an engineer to understand the difference between uncertain and safe. She took off her reading glasses and placed them beside the folder. You think this is simple because you are looking at 3 cars in a garage. I am looking at 30,000 employees, dealerships across the country, pensions, suppliers, and families depending on this company. If we announce a safety crisis before the facts are complete, Sterling could lose everything. If the facts are incomplete, say the facts are incomplete. That is not how public communication works. It is how truth works. She pushed her chair back slightly. The legs made a soft sound against the hardwood floor. Brandon said competitors are watching for weakness. Reporters will turn a technical question into panic. Investors will run. Plants could close. There it was. His name, his reasoning, his fear, delivered through my wife's voice. I kept mine steady. Did Brandon show you the complaint count? He showed me the summary. How many complaints? She hesitated. I do not remember the exact number. Was it more than 100? Her expression changed. Only a little, but enough. She had seen more than she wanted to admit. Where are you getting this information? She asked. I could not tell her. The agreement was still under review, and one careless disclosure could give the wrong board members time to block the transaction. But I could give her one last chance without revealing anything protected. I am asking you as your husband. Do not sign your name to a statement you cannot defend. She stood and walked toward the window. Snow had started falling again, thin white lines crossing the dark backyard. You do not understand what this promotion means to me. Then explain it. It means 12 years of work mattered. It means I finally have a seat at the table instead of preparing notes for people who do. It means I am not the woman everyone assumes got lucky. I looked at her reflection in the glass. And what am I in that story? She did not answer. I already knew. I was the contrast. The mechanic husband. the proof that she had climbed farther than the life waiting at home. Lauren turned around slowly. That is not fair. Fair would have been asking me why I was concerned before deciding my work was too small to matter. Your work is not small. You only say that when nobody from Sterling is listening. The silence that followed felt clean. Painful, but clean. There was nowhere left for either of us to hide. Her phone lit up on the table. Brandon's name appeared above a message asking whether the statement was ready. Lauren stared at it. I watched her face, hoping for one small sign that the woman who once stood beside me after Walker Precision collapsed was still there. She picked up the phone. I have to finish this tonight, she said. Do you believe the statement? I believe the company needs stability. That was not my question. Her eyes filled with frustration, but her voice remained controlled. I believe Brandon knows more about the risk than either of us. That sentence ended something. Not the marriage. Not yet. But the part of me that kept offering trust without evidence finally went quiet. I stood, walked upstairs, and closed the bedroom door behind me. My wedding ring had left a pale line around my finger after 14 years. I turned it slowly, remembering our first apartment, the broken heater, the nights she believed integrity was worth more than comfort. Then I removed it and placed it inside the top drawer of my nightstand. I did not pack a bag. I did not confront her again. Downstairs, the printer started. Page after page slid into the tray while Lauren prepared a message telling the public not to worry. Before midnight, she signed the final draft and sent it to Brandon. The next morning, an invitation arrived in my email for Sterling's launch event. Lauren had not sent it. Charles had. I read the time, the location, and the note beneath it. Closing scheduled for 4 o'clock. Be present. I looked toward the drawer holding my ring, then at the garage keys in my hand. Lauren had chosen the room she wanted to belong in. I decided I would be there when that room learned who had been holding it together. The morning of the launch event, Lauren stood at the kitchen island in a navy dress, reading the final version of Sterling's press statement on her tablet. My wedding ring was still inside the nightstand upstairs. She did not know that. She did not ask why I had slept in the guest room, either. Some marriages end with a slammed door. Ours was learning how to disappear through silence. You are still coming tonight, right? She asked without looking up. Yes. Then please wear the charcoal suit. Her finger continued scrolling. And maybe do not talk about the garage unless someone asks. I poured coffee into a travel mug. What should I say if they ask? She finally looked at me. Just say you work in automotive repair. That is what I do. You know what I mean. I did. She wanted the truth trimmed until it fit comfortably beside her promotion. I left before she could explain further. At Mason Street Garage, Marcus had already opened the bays. The 3 Sterling vehicles were parked together, repaired but not released. We had installed temporary correction units and documented every step for federal review. Maria arrived carrying 2 sealed binders. Daniel followed 10 minutes later with the closing documents in a leather case. The final approval was expected at 4 o'clock. Until then, the company still belonged to the same structure that had ignored 187 warnings. After 4, Walker Mobility Trust would hold 52% of Sterling's voting control. Daniel placed a badge on my workbench. It was black, unmarked, and encoded for every Sterling facility in the country. Charles wanted you to have this before the ceremony, he said. I left it beside my father's old wrench. Not yet. Daniel understood. Power announced too early becomes theater. Power arriving at the correct moment becomes fact. We drove downtown separately. The hotel ballroom looked exactly like the kind of place Lauren had been trying to enter for years. Gold light, white linen, glass walls overlooking Detroit. A full-size Sterling Vantage stood beneath spotlights near the stage, its dark paint reflecting the company logo from the screen above it. Employees moved through the room, carrying champagne and rehearsed confidence. Lauren was already surrounded by Brandon and several executives when I arrived. She saw my work shirt beneath the jacket and gave me a look that lasted less than a second. Disappointment dressed as patience. Ethan, she said, pulling me into the circle. Everyone was just asking about you. Nobody had been. Brandon glanced at my hands. Back from the garage. A few hours ago. Busy season? You could say that. One of the regional managers asked what kind of cars I worked on. Before I could answer, Lauren smiled and said, mostly older vehicles. He fixes whatever people can afford. That was true. Then she added the part designed to make the room understand where I belonged. He makes close to minimum wage, but he likes helping people. The laughter came easily. Brandon made his charity joke. Someone asked whether I got an employee discount through Lauren. Then Brandon tossed me the keys to his Vantage and asked me to inspect the clicking sound before dessert. I caught them, felt the metal press into my palm, and watched Lauren laugh with the rest of them. That was where the evening had begun. Now, standing in the same circle, I watched Daniel near the ballroom entrance checking his phone. Charles entered carrying the narrow black box. The promotional film began. Families drove through mountain roads while a narrator spoke about trust, innovation, and the future of American transportation. Every word sounded expensive. None of it sounded earned. Lauren touched my arm and asked what was happening. Before I could answer, Daniel looked up and nodded. The signature had arrived early. The transaction was complete. Sterling had changed hands while Brandon was still smiling. Charles approached the stage, but Brandon stepped closer to me, unaware that the floor beneath his career had already moved. "You should have checked my car," he said. "That sound is getting worse." "I know." His smile faded slightly. "You know what? The heat shield is loose. The real problem is the control module beneath it." Lauren turned toward me. Brandon gave a dismissive laugh. "Our engineers have cleared that platform." "No," I said. "Your reports cleared it. The hardware did not." The promotional film ended, and applause moved through the ballroom. Charles reached the microphone but did not begin the scheduled speech. Instead, he looked directly at me. The room slowly followed his gaze. Brandon adjusted his jacket. Lauren's fingers slipped from my arm. Daniel closed his phone and locked the ballroom doors for the emergency board session that would follow. Charles placed the black box on the podium. "Before we introduce Sterling's newest vehicle," he said, "we need to introduce the man who will decide what this company becomes next." The room fell quiet. On the wall above us, the clock changed to 4 o'clock. Charles opened the box.